Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage film and entertainment reporter for Bloomberg News, Anousha Sakoui.
女士们、先生们，请大家欢迎来自彭博新闻集团的电影及娱乐记者 Anousha Sakoui.
Thank you very much. Wow, that's loud. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. I think personally, I may be biased, this is going to be one of the better panels, most interesting. But we've got a great panel lineup, which you've probably already had a look through. And we're going to be focusing on film and television financing and some of the dynamic between Hollywood and China, and some of the trends that have really been dominating the news headlines over the past 6 months to a year. And there's lots of change going on. So I will be hoping you might be asking questions at the end, so do feel free to think of some. And about 10 minutes before the end, we will be asking you guys for questions. So I'm going to hopefully have my panelists on. They're welcome to come out whenever they're ready. We've got Bennett Pozil from East West Bank, who's one of the leading banks in Hollywood China financing, and Stephen Scharf, who is co-chair of Entertainment, Sports and Media at Melvany, which is one of the leading law firms, if you know anything about Hollywood and Hollywood deal making. Steve Ransohoff, who's CEO of Film Finances, Inc., and Randy Greenberg, who's a producer.
Is this thing really on?
Oh, I think it's on.
It is now.
And David Lee, who's managing partner and executive vice president of Anthem and Song Pictures. I haven't sort of gone into a presentation for each of you, but I thought maybe we could go across each of you, and you could just give a quick intro into what you do, what's been keeping you busy, and a bit about your firms. You want to start, Bennett?
What keeps me busy is hanging out with the Steves.
I did say don't group. They're both Steves at the end.
I was going to change my name to Steve.
Oh, let's not.
No? Okay. Well, I work at East West Bank, and we do a lot of financing of content for Western and Chinese pictures, TV shows, movies, internet, and work a lot with these gentlemen all the time. Steve gives us great legal advice, and this Steve bonds a lot of our productions, and David's a client of ours, and Randy's very involved in the business, so we were able to do a lot of great things together. But for us, we have a big focus on Chinese content, and we work locally in China with Chinese producers and distributors, so we know that industry very, very well. And then here in the US, in addition to the regular content that we're involved with, we also help Chinese companies invest here in the US. So we recently closed for Perfect World, their deal with Universal. It's called Perfect Universe. And we do a lot of work with Bona, who has a deal with TSG and Fox. And the other Steve helps us with those quite a bit. So every time I mention the Steve name, I get $5 today. So.
I felt an incentive there. Randy, obviously, like a well-rounded producer, you've been involved with Meg, which is one of those very high-profile Chinese co-productions. I think it's a co-production.
Right.
Tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing recently.
So, well, a lot of it's been Meg. I'm an executive producer on Meg, put together the underlying IP and the structure and strategy of the IP. What's that?
We're financing that for you.
Thanks to East West Bank.
And
Sorry.
along with the producers that I worked with, Belle Avery and Colin Wilson, and CMC and Gravity Pictures and Warner Brothers are the entities behind that. The movie's in post-production now, comes out next summer. In addition, I do additional work with Gravity Pictures on some other pictures, and with Shaw Brothers.
And Meg is particular as a co-production, right? I think it's probably one of the biggest.
I don't know if it's the biggest, but it is certainly one of the biggest.
Yeah.
And is a co-production between China and the US, and was structured and put together that way to qualify as such. And it's not an easy task.
No, I can imagine. David, you're working with the Russo brothers. Tell us a bit about Anthem and Song Pictures.
Sure, yeah. For Russo brothers, right now they are directing Avengers 3 and 4 in Atlanta, and we are also having this Anthem and Song studio, which is specifically focused on the Chinese content and the collaboration with the Chinese filmmakers for the local productions. And so far, we have done a couple of films. Some films, they are released already, including Wolf Warrior 2.
All right, congratulations.
We collaborated on the special effect team, and also we blended with the Western music.
Thank you. Steve Ransohoff, tell us a bit about what you do.
Strangely enough, I started my career as a young lawyer here in Los Angeles, at which point I met Stephen, which was back in 1983. So, you know, one of the things about the film business that is interesting is you tend to know the people for a very long period of time. Anyhow, in the mid-'80s, I was hired by this company, Film Finances, which gives completion guarantees for films. Completion guarantee is simple to explain, difficult to do, but basically we give assurances to people that their films will get finished, provided all the budget money is put up. We're responsible for over budget on films and getting films delivered on time, so forth. We do about 200 films a year all around the world. We deal quite a bit with Bennett.
I'll take that for you.
And his colleagues.
And you've worked on some films like La La Land.
A lot of films.
A lot of
yes.
films.
Too
Yeah.
many to count. I just have to turn my phone off.
Thanks.
It's only me calling you, I'm sorry.
Put on
Yeah.
speaker.
It looks good.
Trying to distract me. Anyhow, the company has grown quite a bit. We recently, about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, opened up an office in Shanghai where we're getting involved with Chinese films, local language films, and co-productions. And that business is getting very interesting. So I'll be talking about that later.
Stephen, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but also maybe take that opportunity as well to say where you think we are in terms of the connection between Hollywood and China and their involvement. Like, how far do you think we've developed that relationship?
I'm Stephen Scharf. I'm a lawyer, partner at O'Melveny and Myers. I would say I only work in the entertainment, sports, and media field. I'd say at the moment 80+% of what I do involves China, either representing non-Chinese companies doing business in China or Chinese companies doing business outside of China. It's a big law firm, international law firm. We have offices in Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, and around the rest of the world. In terms of where we are or where we're going,
It's a very general question, I know, but
well, I want to answer the question. Where we are, I think there has been, over the past 5-7 years, a significant, I'll start from the Western side to China, significant investment into the China business. Part of the challenge is under existing Chinese government regulations, non-Chinese cannot own motion picture production companies, distribution companies, or internet streaming companies. So it's kind of complicated to invest into China. We've worked on a number of slate financings involving China, including the Gravity financing where we represented Warner Brothers, this is all public information, Warner Brothers in connection with their joint venture with CMC to make Chinese language movies. We also represented IMAX in a transaction with CMC, likewise to make large budget Chinese movies.
so you've been very active in that area. You found a lot to keep you busy over the past few years.
Myself and other people in the firm. On the business coming over this way, we've represented a number of very prominent Chinese companies, both investing into non-Chinese entertainment companies, motion picture, television companies, movie slates. Bennett mentioned, or someone mentioned Bona. We've represented Bona in the TSG transactions, as well as a lot of work with Alibaba in terms of some of their film investments. Represent a number of other companies, increasingly in the television industry, who are investing into the U.S. industry. So that's kind of where I think we are. In terms of the co-productions, I think these gentlemen know better than I do the state of where we've been and where we may be going.
One thing, I suppose, if someone asked me quickly to characterize, maybe the past 6 months to a year, it's been a story about, this plethora of deals that had been happening, this huge influx of Chinese money, maybe some questions about whether deals were getting done and being reliably funded. But then all of a sudden, I guess in the past 6 months to a year, seeing deals collapse as uncertainty starts to arise around what the Chinese government wants from its media and entertainment companies, if it wants them to be investing externally. Bennett, can I ask you, in terms of, I hear very mixed messages about, you just talked about closing a deal, about what is possible right now. Would you say that you have seen a slowdown because of the uncertainty about, this week's Congress or whatnot, and how are you finding the deal making further at the minute, the activity levels?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
Which, by the way, we worked on your movie for Gravity in China to take care of the onshore spend.
Right.
I kind of view our business and the role that our bank plays is that we're like water. And so water is always going to flow. There's pardon use the word gravity, but it just, you can put a roadblock somewhere, water's still going to find a way around. So when we first started in this business in 2011, what we were hearing is Chinese companies had a tough time in terms of the timing to legally move funds from onshore to offshore to make investments. And the government got very proactive in finding tools that you could use that over the last 6 years were used by Wanda and others to move monies from onshore to offshore to make investments. Some of the investments that were made were smart, made a lot of sense, and some were head scratchers. That's also something you'll find anywhere. So if we remove China for a second and you look at just deals that happen in the U.S. with U.S. companies, you'll find that same ingredients, that there's good deals, there's stupid deals, there's emotional deals, there's also deals that are win-win that make good sense. We're not a very transaction-oriented institution. We look for relationships, and you're looking for relationships, you will also find win-win. So the deal that Stephen Scharf mentioned that we both have been involved with, where we have a client of ours who's Bona, who is still investing in content offshore. These programs or products or tools that I mentioned about that were used over the last 6 years have been turned off for a while. And I think that that's going to change. But if you have invested in the past in something offshore, and what you invested in actually does well, you create additional collateral or revenue sources offshore. So for Bona and investing in the movies they did with Fox, they actually did pretty well. Yep. And so you can take waterfall from one picture and stick it into another. And by doing that, that's how they're able to continue to meet their kind of corporate goals, both onshore and offshore. So I think that the deals that are not win-win and where people were trying to use these rules to kind of sneak money out or not be as, let's say, upfront about what they were doing, I think that's really what's being turned off right now. Okay. So I think that real companies in China who are investing in real companies here, I think those deals will always find a way.
It's good to hear. Randy, from as a creative, do you see any change in the demand and interest in co-productions or in the kinds of movies that you would work on?
No, I think that in the last 10 years, the appetite for film in China has become voracious. And knowing that China has the most theaters of any country in the world, surpassing our own, that they have to feed this machine that has shelf space. So there's no choice in going back. There's not a lot of good product yet. Certainly not a lot of good co-production product yet, but it'll get better and it'll increase. And to Bennett's point, the spigot is turned down, that's for sure, in the last 6 months. But the appetite from both sides is still there. The question will be, how can both sides continue to work together around the obstacles that have been put in place by the government officials, where they don't want to stop it either. They just don't want this massive outflow of capital that has gone on, and they don't want stupid deals to continue to get made. They want smart deals to be made. And there's a lot of really smart deals that have been made, and many of some, in fact, that really people don't talk about, that they've just been really good deals and those companies just continue to make good deals, and they're not flamboyant about it.
And just to keep on the point of co-productions, you know, that's sort of the idea of co-productions. That there'd been so few, I think, of US, China ones. I know there are others from different countries, but do you think that there will continue to be a focus on getting more of those better prospects for US-China co-productions, or do you think that they will remain a kind of minority of the amount of films that we see?
I think in the short term it'll remain a minority, but every producer and every production company and every financier wants that additional, remuneration that comes from the 25 to 43%. Everybody wants that. So it's really a question of how do you creatively make the content work for all sides of the equation. It's a very difficult, very difficult piece to come by.
And I want to return to this topic a bit later because there's beforehand we talked about other potentials for ways of making co-productions work. But David, I want to come to you. You mentioned Wolf Warrior, two of us had a lot of success, and recently in the Chinese box office we're seeing a resurgence after maybe a slightly disappointing or less exuberant year last year that we had been used to in China. What's your perspective of movie going in China, and can you give us a bit of a feel for the appetite for movie going and on the back of that investment?
Sure. I think in China, the mainstream has already elevated the appetite throughout the years, especially when we were talking about 3 to 4 years ago. The average age for the audience is roughly 21 to 22, that kind of age, compared to the US, about 30 on average.
So that kind of fits our average age here on the panel. That's
Right.
All right.
And now they are also kind of like moving up the age to roughly 23 to 24. Giving this shift is subtle, only like 2 to 3 years, but it means a very significant need for the elevation of the quality, the creativity of the contents. And what I can see is for co-production, that's something, like Randy said, remain minority, because this is really the box office sharing in order to get around the 34 films quota set by China. And only a couple of studios can do it. For example, like CMC, they did a Kung Fu Panda, and now they do the Meg again, given they have such an experience. Other people, they try the same model, it just wouldn't work. Right. So for us, we are talking to the filmmakers, including the young talents and also established directors. And we feel a very good way is to do the collaboration and try to bridge the Hollywood technology and also the contents as well as the creativity. For example, sometimes it can be like the director of photography, other time they are looking for special effects, visual effects, art director. So depending on the different elements they are looking for, we are trying to collaborate on different fronts.
Right.
Regarding the financing, I think for the companies listed in A-share or having those assets in China, it's difficult to make the big deal, because when they borrow the loan facility from the local Chinese bank, when you try to loan for the overseas acquisition, right now the government is really monitoring and try to deny it. But on the other hand, some very successful company listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange, when they don't have any RMB debt from the local China bank, then they are allowed to do it because they don't own any Chinese government any money. For some conglomerate, I know they invested in some local Hong Kong insurance companies where through the listed entity, they continue to make investments in Hollywood and also throughout the US industries.
And you have offices both in LA and Beijing, right?
Right now, we're in the process of setting up the VIE structure so that we can also do business locally.
And is the funding that you're looking for, is it mainly coming from China? And
It was.
it was, yeah, but
Right.
now you're looking elsewhere?
Yes.
As well?
I have some money for you. It's in my pocket.
We talk about it off stage.
Do you anticipate, given the events of this week, what kind of changes do you think will happen in terms of for filmmakers, the availability of funding from Chinese banks or overseas banks?
Depending on the censorship, because now I think today is day 2 or day 3 for the party committees. And we are talking to some major studio heads. It used to be fantasy film. They are talking about like a time travel, so that they just go for the box office. They go for the internet hits. But now it's really not something that's healthy for the perspective of the young people to grow up to see all those content. It can be like a fantasy content. It's non-existent. So we have a couple of films. Right now we are collaborating depending on the tone they set up for the film censorship. Then we decide whether we can make it very, very simple. Everything is talking about like action or simple story, or we have some background, which can be complicated, which can be culturally sensitive.
That's interesting. And when do you think, given your experience, how long do you think until maybe for Chinese filmmakers you'll have a better idea of what this Congress means?
After that, I think it will go to the Film Bureau for them to study and to get a sense on the spirit of the party, to see like how they try to modify the censorship. And in such a way, we continue to communicate with the censorship, with the Film Bureau.
So you'll find your way slowly.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to go to the Steves. Steve, film financer Steve first. In terms of, with the events of this week, what are your expectations for the next few months in terms of, investment and, doing the business that you're in? Do you expect more certainty? And if so, what do you think is going to be driving that? What do you think will be the outcome?
Well, our business primarily is involved with independent films. A number of the producers we deal with are doing films with studios, but the primary driver in the last 2 years of independent filmmakers has been selling films there for big money. Minimum guarantees of over $10 or $15 million. That has actually slowed down in the last 6 months while there's been some uncertainty. So presumably once this Congress is over, it'll be clear about how people, selling films independently are going to be able to get the money to make their movies. One thing that's been very interesting about our business in China, our company, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about how it works, but we're kind of like the bellwether of the independent film business because we do so many films, we can see the trends developing. So we opened up an office in China to give completion guarantees for Chinese films. And really the strangest thing has happened is most of the films that we have done are actually Chinese films that are shooting outside of China. So these are fully Chinese films shot in the Chinese language by Chinese filmmakers and crews, but they've all been made outside of China. And likewise, for the films we're now doing in China, these are all American films that are being shot in China. So it's really just been the opposite of what we had thought. And no one in my company can come up with a good explanation for this, but it is what it is. And so, for our product, it's been, our business is growing, but it's just really strange that, the films we're dealing with, which are kind of independent films in China, are all being shot outside of China, whereas we're doing Chinese films that are shot in China, all with mostly Americans and Europeans. I don't know if you've got any good explanation for that.
Randy, you
But-
sound like
They can't get their money out of China, so
Yeah.
you got to shoot in China in order to get your
No, but
financier
they're
to pay.
shooting the movies outside of China.
the
Well,
Chinese.
they need the bonds outside of China because they don't have their own crews, and they're probably taking
That's
advantage
right.
of tax credits. And to really monetize those tax credits, you need to have film finances or a completion guarantor.
Which is
Right.
a
Right.
good thing.
So it's a good business.
Onshore, like inside China, there's the Western shoots that shoot there, they're still being predicated on either the pre-sale model or comfort of having that bond. Whereas for the local Chinese content itself, the line producers and the financial controllers, they still have a hesitation. They're not comfortable yet turning over some of those tools. And that's, I think, the work that your great team is working on there to kind of break through.
Yeah, it's true, but it's just been very interesting. So in terms of the political situation in China, I think there will be, coming out of this, hopefully some more clarity and less ambiguity in terms of both the censorship requirements, which is still an issue for a lot of companies, as well as the financing and what tools, as Bennett was saying, are going to be permissible to get money out of China and have certainty in that. Because if you don't have that, it's very hard to put a deal together
Right.
these days.
Mr. Scharf, do you want to give your prognosis for the coming months?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a while for us to know what's going to happen in China. The descriptions of President Xi's speech that I've read in the English language were pretty blunt. I mean, he basically, according to the articles, said that the party needs to take over increasing control over all aspects of society, including the economy, religion, culture, and entertainment, which to me is a bit ominous. So we'll see how that plays out. About 8 weeks ago, some formal regulations were issued in China that weren't aimed at the entertainment industry per se, but affected the ability of onshore Chinese companies to invest outside of China. There are 3 categories. Certain investments are favored and encouraged, and that has a lot to do with the Belt and the Road. The middle ground is subject to approval. We'll look at it very carefully, and that includes entertainment, media, real estate, theme parks, hotels, and then there's a prohibited section. And the regulations haven't been issued yet, but there are 2 separate government agencies in China that would need to approve any investment that's made in the restricted zone. And no one knows what standards are going to be applied, but I think, as people have referred to, it's not just going to be you're a good company, and there's going to be a substantive review of the economics of the transaction.
That's right.
And is that scrutiny by definition then going to make things harder to do, or do you think parties will be willing to go through, the fine-tooth combing of finances and funding?
Well, from the Chinese side, I don't think we really know how restrictive and difficult it's going to be, other than 2 agencies are involved. There's no set time frame. So I don't think anybody knows, to be honest with you. On the other side, investment into the U.S., and again, I'm not speaking about individual movies, which would fall in under the Chinese regulations. Under the U.S. regulations, I think our industry is going to be collateral to the greater negotiations between China and the U.S.
On the WTO negotiation?
I meant trade generally.
Okay.
I think we're a small part of it, and I think it's extremely political. In the U.S., we have, I think we talked about on the phone, some CFIUS regulations, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., which was intended to only restrict M&A activity where a foreign entity invested in a strategic or infrastructure industry in the U.S., mostly technology or something strategic.
Well, it could be of a national security issue. Or
Right. Dubai wanted to buy ports in the U.S., but after the election, both Wilbur Ross and Ted Cruz made statements as we've got to prevent Chinese investment into the entertainment industry because they're going to make propaganda films.
Yeah. And have you seen that have a sort of chilling effect on? I know Wang Jianlin some months ago did say that he thought it was put people off, but from your experience on the front line, do you think it's put off investors?
Yeah, I mean, let me just make one other point. Ultimately, the decision to permit or not permit an investment is made by the president.
Okay.
And their decision is not subject to court review. So I think, there's extraordinary politics going on, and whether the entertainment industry is strategic or not, I mean, I think there are bigger issues at play than, just can we let Chinese companies invest in television production companies?
Right.
The answer is yes. I mean, on a number of transactions where we either represent the U.S. company or the offshore company, the first question is, are you going to be able to get your money out of China? Show to us that you actually have the money. And third, are we going to have a CFIUS problem in the U.S.? Those are the questions you ask first.
Okay.
And I think what it leads to is if there's a Chinese investor and one from Europe or one from the U.S., and the bids are equal, you're going to not go with the Chinese investor.
Sure.
There's just too much uncertainty.
I'm going to open the floor to questions.
Can I just add one thing on to what he said? I think that, I think all of us do a lot of work in the U.S. and also in China. And I think the biggest mistake that Westerners make is trying to employ a Western mindset into figuring out what's going to happen. Yeah. Because our mindset is not going to create any type of linear decision-making that will tie into it. Same thing with negotiating deals. So when you find American companies, falling apart with Chinese companies who are doing a deal, it's because no one's aligned in thought. And so I think that here, as Steve mentioned, I think very well, there's so many issues right now geopolitically in terms of the U.S. government, the Chinese government, Korea, et cetera, that's also having impact in what we're seeing at this moment. So I don't think anything's going to happen in the near term, and I don't think there's going to be some proclamation. I just think that little by little, some companies in China will be allowed to do certain things, and that they will find its way here. Yes.
Yeah. Do we have any questions? Oh, sir in the front row, maybe? I don't know if there's microphones. I can't see. There's one in the back. Sorry, let me just take this one with the microphone.
I have friends who are independent producers, major producers, and they have had difficulty working with Chinese investors in films that they're producing, not just because of regulations, but because of cultural differences, language differences, the time that it takes to translate documents for the Chinese side, etc. And they become very frustrated, and projects have fallen apart, mainly because of this complication. What is there a short-term solution?
Randy, do you have any advice for anyone trying to bridge the cultural divide, and David as well?
Not to put a nail in it, big deal. That happens all the time, whether it's German, Russian, Chinese, Venezuelan, Latin American. It happens. If you're interested in working with entities that are willing to put money in or co-produce that aren't English speakers in your language, that's part of the process. You either deal with it or you don't deal with it.
David, is there something that you would say, maybe Americans or other foreigners coming to China that they should?
Yeah, I can see for U.S. and China, the mainstream viewers, they do share some common elements. For example, like adventure, like action film, it can be simple. Used to be expandable, where in the U.S. the franchising is declining, but it's simple, and it can tell a clear story. Even like it's more like a goal seeking, which for the U.S. Viewers, they have seen too many of the films. But in China, you're talking about like the different tier of viewers from the first tier city all the way down to fifth tier city. So depending on the film, for the simple action film, it can still also thrive in the cities like a third tier to fifth tier city. Those topics and the genre, including action, the fantasy, the venture, as well as disasters movie.
Okay.
Some like a big difference and a discrepancy for the content development. You can see Resident Evil, the final chapter in the US only grows roughly like 25 million US,
Right.
but in China, talking about close to 200 million US dollars. And also for the triple X, in China is almost like 200 million compared to the US, 50 million US. And also China is having the appetite for the content that can resonate with the local habit and to the local Chinese taste. For example, the film from India, The Dangle, in the US, is talking about unpopular sports. In the US, it grows 12 million, but in China, it's more than 200 million. The recent film talking about plagiarism for the TOEFL exam, because China is really like Chinese and they are focusing on the education.
Yeah.
Now it's only like 4 to 5 days. It's already grows more than 200 million RMB. This is a Thai film. The total cost is less than 2 million US dollars.
So,
So the topic can be diverse, and for local Chinese, they have a different taste. And the taste is tiered depending on first tier city all the way like down to the third to fifth tier city, which are the mainstream.
Did anyone else
for
have any
China
thoughts they
population.
wanted to throw in about
I'd
raising
say,
money or?
in terms of his comment, I
Yeah.
think that if you're working in China and as a Western person, you got to do things Chinese style. And if you're Chinese and you're working in the U.S., you got to do things U.S. style. That's one of like home field advantages.
Right.
But at the end of the day, people typically hear what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And sometimes the cultural difference is someone's giving you a polite no and you take it for a yes.
Would you like to?
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Since independent films can be a pretty high-risk investment, I'm sure it requires a lot of discretion, nuanced discretion to kind of decide which productions to take on. I was wondering, from kind of a broader criteria, what kind of factors do you look at when deciding whether or not to invest in an independent film?
Me?
Or
him?
anyone?
I think that's your question, Bennett.
Well, we get to be, we don't really care about the content, sorry. We're not producers, we're financiers. So we look at the overall pie, the overall mechanics, pretty similar to how Steve would look at things as well, but different than how David and Randy would look at it. So if it's an independent movie and it's Western, I'm more interested in pre-sales and tax credits, what the size of the pie is. If it's in China, I'm more interested in who our partners in China are going to be. So I'm going to look at, is it Shin Lee or Tong Dove on a TV content, or is it Huai Brothers, Enlight, or Bono, let's say, on a film content? Because exploitation is what drives getting repaid, and so in each of the territories, it works differently.
Any other?
Yeah. And one thing in China is quite unique, but this is a thriving business for a film with a good lineup. Even before the film is made, then by distributors or other investors, it can be strategic investor, it can be the listed company, it can also be like a PE fund. They have the box office guarantee. For example, if you know a film, the production cost, including like later on P&A, probably like $30 to $40 million. And now you know like distributors or other investors, they want to guarantee the film with a price above that. When you go into investing in the film, then the downside is quite limited. But on the other hand, you also have to show the resources you can bring to the film. That can be very low-risk investment. Either you can be like a great content developer, you are a good director, your executive producers or like your good stars, like having the box office, that kind of power. You show your resources for good investments.
So I think we've got like a minute left if you wanted to ask a quick last question.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for being here. Whoa, this is loud.
It's fine.
Hey,
Can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm deafening myself with my own laugh. Carry on. Sorry.
Hi. So I'm representing this this action movie as a package project from a Warner Brothers producer, and the two questions that I had for you guys was, based on your historical deals that you've made, what's the difference between getting investments from a Chinese financier and an American one, and then how to find the right home in terms of distribution and marketing in China?
It's quite a broad question. Either of the Steves want to have any thoughts?
Well, I'd say in the first instance, what we were saying earlier is, where's the film going to get made? If you're planning on making it outside of China, having a Chinese investor, unless they have the ability to get the money out of the country, you're kind of dead in the water. If you're making it in Europe or here, you're going to have difficulties getting the money out. An American financier, you know, they have different criteria. Like Bennett said, they look to pre-sales and, you know, are a little bit maybe risk adverse than a Chinese investor might be, who, you know, if it's the right kind of genre film, they know they'll get their money out from the Chinese box office. So they all have their pluses and minuses, but the first issue you'd have to consider is just the portability of the money, because if you don't have the money in the place you're making the movie, you're going to have some problems.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Little Steve?
Well, on the distribution side, which distributor to go to, you know, if you can get US and Canadian distribution commitments, that's critical. And if you're lucky enough to have more than one studio bidding on the property, that's a high order problem to have. So, but I don't have any input which studio would be better or not. But, you know, I would never make a movie unless I had US and Canadian distribution commitment. Second, depending, you know, taking into account what Steve said, you would look at the difficulty of negotiations with the potential investor, the likelihood of closing, and the likelihood they're going to honor their funding commitments. And, you know, depending who your domestic financier is or the Chinese, you may come out with different decisions. It's, you know, someone saying they want to invest and actually getting it documented and having them perform are two different things. So.
Yes. Thank
And
you.
I have found, though, if you're looking for a Chinese distributor, though, what certainly worked and is working for the movie that I'm working on, Meg, is that Gravity Pictures is both the investor, the co-producer, as well as the distributor. And they're intimately invested in not only how well the movie creatively is put together, and obviously the money that they've put into it, but they're intimately invested in the marketing and distribution of the picture as well. And having that connected makes them more diligent in the release strategy, the marketing strategy, and ultimately, you know, how well that movie, you know, is going to do in that territory. And I don't know where the gentleman went that had asked the first question. I was a little flippant in my comment.
Yes, Randy.
But
I mean, we didn't want to say.
But it was really more of, it's really more of like, it's about a relationship. So I don't know where he went, but
We're going to talk off stage.
We'll talk off
Yeah,
stage.
we'll talk off
I mean, it's all about relationship. You have to be in a relationship with whoever it is you're going to work with. The filmmaking, you know, and television making is collaborative as in its nature. You have to be able to get along and deal with the other side and with the cultural sensitivities and the timing and all of that. It's not necessarily when you want it to be done, but the projects always take on a life of their own, and they happen when they're supposed to happen, and you have to be a little more patient to allow it to live and breathe on its own.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for listening, and we were out of time. Thanks to this great panel.